Is the pendulum clock really that much fun? Zhang Yixia asked curiously. Lu Ning grinned and replied, Definitely. Whoever plays it knows how exciting it is. It's like flying in the sky with your soul chasing after you. Zhang Yixia's eyes lit up with excitement as she said, If I ever get the chance to visit Earth in the future, I would love to try it out. She quickly composed herself, concealing her enthusiasm. It's getting late. I should be heading out, said Zhang Yixia. Okay, tomorrow I'll tell you about a palace intrigue drama that's sure to be exciting.
Liu Ning promised.
Lu Ning stood at the entrance of the villa, grinning as she watched Zhang Yixia disappear into the elevator. With a flick of her wrist, she waved goodbye until Zhang Yixia was completely out of sight before heading back inside. As Lu Ning entered the room, Zhang Tao asked eagerly, Did she leave already? Yes, she's gone, Lu Ning replied with a sly smile. Tell me, did you manage to get any information out of her? Zhang Tao inquired eagerly. I sure did. Her name is Zhang Yixia, and it was given to her by her commander, Lu Ning revealed. Feeling proud of herself, she also confirmed our suspicions. She has been at this base for as long as she can remember, she continued, relaying the new information she had obtained.
Pa.
On the basketball court, Zhao Yu dribbled the ball and performed a crossover against Bajia before making a layup that goes into the basket. Nice shot. Brother Yu is awesome. Lu Wu Mei, who was watching Zhao Yu play, praised his skills.
Tata.
As Zhao Yu continued his rigorous basketball practice, the sound of approaching footsteps caught his attention. He turned to see who it is and sees Zhang Yixia. He stopped his exercise and reached for the towel that Lu Wu Mei hands him, wiping off his sweat. How was it? Did you get anything? Zhao Yu asked. Zhang Yixia nodded. Yes, Commander. I've gained Lu Ning's trust and obtained a lot of valuable information. A satisfied smile spread across Zhao Yu's face. Well done, Yixia. All the information you've gathered will be uploaded to the Panga Center, where our butler will analyze it. Beep. Just as Zhao Yu finished speaking, the red light on the wall began to flash, signaling the appearance of the butler. Commander, from White Rabbit 9, we have obtained detailed information about Earth, the butler said. The extraterrestrial civilization known as Earth is currently dominated by the human race, which shares biological similarities with you. According to historical records about the human race, they are a very aggressive species, and their entire civilization is built on waging wars with each other. Zhao Yu scratched his head. He wanted to say that he is also from Earth, but there was no need to tell an AI that. What is the evaluation from the Pangu Center? He asked. Planet, Earth. Ruling race, humans. Civilization level, 0.75. Total number of invasions between nations in the last century, 51. Number of non-human species on their dining tables, 2,533. Civilization assessment, chaotic neutrality. Recommendation, immediately destroy this civilization. After listening to the butler's report, Zhao Yu furrowed his brow. This was one of the 9 camps that lagged behind the rest, a camp that any other civilization in the universe would try to destroy if they discovered it. Could the evaluation be wrong? Zhao Yu asked. As someone from Earth, he couldn't help but feel dismayed by the negative evaluation of his home planet. He knew that Earth was not performing as well as it could, but he also believed that his planet had much more to offer than what the evaluation suggested. The Earthlings are good at disguising themselves to be peace-loving, he continued, but history and data don't lie. There's a saying, never believe a crocodile's tears. At the entrance of the Great Xia Space Agency, Chief Engineer Yang stood on the steps, looked expectantly in one direction. After about 30 seconds, a black car appeared, and a young man in military uniform stepped out. He looked to be in his 20s. He was probably not the one Chief Engineer Yang was looking for. As soon as Chief Engineer Yang saw the young man's age, he knew he wasn't the person he was waiting for and continued to look towards the other side of the car. Unexpectedly, after the young man got off the car, the black car drove away directly. Has the investigator not come yet? Chief Engineer Yang was confused and asked the young man who had just gotten off of the car. I am the investigator. The young man handed him a file folder and said, My name is Chu. I'm here to assist in the investigation. Here are the documents.
Ah?
Chief Young was surprised. The investigator sent by the higher-ups will assist in the investigation, but the level of authority given was high. In special circumstances, even he had to follow the investigator orders. He didn't expect the investigator to be this young. He quickly took the file and began to check it. To his surprise, it was indeed the person in front of him. After a brief glance at the young man's shoulder badge, Chief Engineer Young stretched out his hand with a smile and said, "Colonel Chu, hello. I will trouble you for the next period of time." Colonel Chu nodded slightly, did not shake hands, and walked directly towards the door. He said, "Let's not waste any more time. Please lead the way." Chief Engineer Young rubbed his nose. He felt that this young man was really something else. He shook his head, did what he was told, and explained the situation. When the group returned to the control room, Chief Engineer Young had already explained the situation. As you probably know, White Rabbit 9 has disappeared. Our analysis shows that it may have been kidnapped by aliens, Chief Engineer Young explained. Colonel Chu said seriously, "I came here to figure out one thing. Are there aliens on the moon?" Chief Engineer Young frowned. "But what about the 3 astronauts? Are we just going to abandon them?" Colonel Chu said coldly, "If aliens really do arrive, you shouldn't worry about the astronauts anymore. You should worry about how long you'll survive." Everyone in the room grew tense and dared not even take a breath. The investigator sent by the higher-ups was clearly different. Chief Engineer Young felt overwhelmed and reluctantly said, "Do as you please. The higher-ups have instructed us to fully cooperate with you." Chief Engineer Young, "How many satellites can be used for inspection of the moon?" Colonel Chu asked. 8. Chief Engineer Young replied. "How many of them are orbiting near the landing site of White Rabbit 9? Colonel Chu asked. 2. And one of them is still there, the Chang'e 3 satellite, Chief Engineer Young responded. Colonel Chu smiled and said, "Take control of it and land the Chang'e 3 satellite there." What? All the staff present were shocked. The lifespan of Chang'e 3 satellite still has 13 years. Do we abandon it like this? Chief Engineer Young asked. Colonel Chu remained silent and muttered to himself, "We'll land it at the landing site. Make sure to adjust the landing posture." I don't understand.
Chief Engineer Yang shouted.
Even though the Chang'e 3 satellite wasn't alive, Chief Engineer Yang had personally witnessed its creation and launch. To him, it was like his own child. Can't we just have the Chang'e 3 satellite search for aliens in space if we want to find them? Colonel Chu's expression remained unchanged as he replied calmly, "Our country already has 8 satellites orbit around the moon, the oldest of which has been in service for nearly 20 years. During that time, have we discovered any aliens?"
No.
This clearly shows that our satellites are unable to detect the presence of aliens. Only through close encounters can we find out what is truly happening. Chief Engineer Yang sighed as he realized that Colonel Chu was resolute in his decision to crash the satellite. With all the staff watching, Chief Engineer Yang spoke firmly. "You've all heard Colonel Chu's words, right? Let's follow his instructions and have the Chang'e 3 satellite crash into the moon." Adjusting the propulsion system, Chang'e 3 satellite, prepare for your final mission. Let the landing begin. Hiss hiss. The large screen displaying Chang'e 3 satellite rapidly descended as it was pulled in by the moon's gravitational force. Gas was then expelled from the bottom of Chang'e 3 satellite, which helped in slowing down its landing speed. As the descent rate slowed down less significantly than expected, Chief Engineer Young quickly commanded, "Increase the thrust." Under his remote control, the Chang'e 3 satellite made 5 adjustments before finally achieving the proper landing speed. Boom! The Chang'e 3 satellite successfully landed without making any sound, although everyone expected there to be one. "Okay, let's adjust the cameras as I instructed," said Colonel Chu, not wanting to let everyone else dwell on the emotion of the moment. The screen was quickly split into 8 sections, each displaying a different image. "Everyone, pay attention. If anything seems out of the ordinary, report it immediately," Colonel Chu said loudly. Colonel Chu's gaze was fixed on the 3rd screen, which showed the landing site of White Rabbit 9. Will this actually work?
Chief Engineer Yang questioned skeptically.
He doubted that aliens would be foolish enough to fall for such an obvious trap. After all, Chang'e 3 satellite was purely an electronic device without any signs of life. It might not be able to attract aliens. Despite his doubts, Chief Engineer Yang turned his attention to the fifth screen where the camera was aimed upwards, revealing a vast expanse of black outer space and a long, faraway horizon. 30 minutes passed. My eyes are getting sore. How much longer do we have to watch? The team was quite energetic at first, but as time passed without any change on the screen, they began to feel exhausted. Colonel Chu furrowed his brow, seemingly dissatisfied with the team's attitude. He continued to stare at the screen, hang on for another half an hour. If there are still no changes, I will call someone to take over. At that moment, Chief Engineer Yang felt there was a movement on the screen in front of him. Something's up. Quick, look at the fifth screen, he shouted, staring intently at it. Everyone's attention was drawn to the fifth screen. On this screen, where outer space and the ground intersected, there was a black that seemed to be moving. What is that? Asked Colonel Chu, adjusting his glasses and stepping forward to get a better look. He was afraid of missing any crucial information. After over 30 seconds, the black on the screen finally grew to the size of a mung bean, and the group was able to see what it truly was. A rock. Chief Engineer Yang was confused. The screen displayed a rolling black that was just an ordinary-looking rock. Assistant Little Wang muttered, "It should be a meteorite that has just been sucked into the ground." With no wind on the moon, the movement of the giant rock must have been affected by gravity. It shouldn't be a meteorite. I've been staring at the screen, and it didn't appear from outer space, but from the horizon. Chief Engineer Yang denied the meteorite's explanation and said, "It's a typical falling moon rock phenomenon caused by rock movement due to moonquakes." After knowing that it was just a rock, he felt a little disappointed. After all, as a staff member of the Space Administration, he had seen such a phenomenon many times. A falling rock? Colonel Chu doubted it and continued to stare at the screen without blinking. On the screen, the rock grew larger and larger until it took up a fifth of the lens, but still had some distance between it and camera. It became clear that it was a massive rock with a diameter of at least 10 meters. Wait, what is that? Suddenly, someone pointed at the screen with horror on their face. Everyone watching the fifth screen noticed something strange. The camera of Chang'e 3 satellite captured a perfectly square hole that had suddenly appeared on the surface of the giant rock. Then, something like a tentacle emerged from the opening. Beep! The camera flickered with a faint red light before all 8 screens went black. What the hell is going on? Why did it go black? Colonel Chu turned to Chief Engineer Yang, who looked just as horrified as he was. Is that some kind of signal jamming device? Chief Yang asked incredulously. Colonel Chu nodded, his expression turning from horror to excitement. Okay, everyone. Back up all the video data captured by Chang'e 3 satellite onto this USB drive, he said, pausing briefly before addressing the entire room with a stern tone. I need to make it clear that everything you're about to see is confidential and cannot be disclosed to anyone outside of this room. He knew that this may not be enough, so he pulled out an old-fashioned flip phone and dialed a number. With just one press of a button, the call connected. Seal the area. The 3 words were all that was needed. After hanging up, he was confident that the person in charge would arrive soon to sign confidentiality agreements with the space agency. Colonel Chu represented a powerful force, and within minutes of the call, a large group of people arrived to secure the area. As Chief Engineer Yang observed the intimidating crowd, he realized the severity of the situation. Feeling uneasy, he asked, Colonel Chu, if it's proven to be an alien, what should we do? You don't need to worry about that. Colonel Chu thought for a moment before asking, how many spacecraft capable of carrying humans to the moon are currently available on the ground? What?
Chief Engineer Yang exclaimed.
White Rabbit 9 is the only spacecraft currently in service. There's also an experimental backup, but it's uncertain whether it can be launched. Colonel Chu nodded and patted Chief Engineer Yang's arm. His eyes gleamed with excitement as he said, prepare the experimental spacecraft for launch. Find 2 skilled astronauts who can operate the spacecraft and have them ready to launch at a moment's notice. This request overwhelmed Chief Engineer Yang. Outer space missions were usually planned a year, or even several years in advance. How could they just launch on a whim like this? Suddenly, he realized something. Wait a minute, you're not thinking of going up there yourself, are you? We still haven't heard from the 3 astronauts on White Rabbit 9. If there's a chance to negotiate with aliens, why not? Colonel Chu's lips curled up. It was as if he didn't care about his life at all. Chief Engineer Yang could hardly believe his ears. This man is a lunatic, he thought. As they couldn't come to an agreement, they remained silent for a while. As the silence continued, Chief Engineer Yang cleared his throat and asked, "Shouldn't we inform other countries about the aliens? It's not just a matter for our country. Not for now. Let me talk to the aliens first, and then I'll decide whether to inform the other countries," replied Colonel Chu calmly. "But what if you disappear like the 3 astronauts?" Chief Engineer Yang was worried.
Ah. Colonel Chu smirked.
That will be the signal to inform other countries. Chief Engineer Yang was initially confused but quickly realized Colonel Chu's intention. Colonel Chu wanted to go to the moon first and talk to the aliens. If the negotiations were successful, it would be a great opportunity for Great Xia. If not, the worst-case scenario would be to disappear from everyone's sight like Zhang Tao and his team. This also meant that Colonel Chu was willing to sacrifice his life to determine whether the aliens on the moon were an opportunity or a danger for the Great Xia Kingdom. Chief Engineer Yang's emotions were mixed, and he looked at Colonel Chu with a hint of admiration in his eyes. After a long pause, he finally said, "If you meet Zhang Tao at the alien base, can you pass on a message for me?" Colonel Chu asked curiously, "What message?" "Tell him that the little punk who climbed onto his balcony to meet his daughter, the one he wanted to break the legs of, is my son."